There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a garden before the sun fully clears the tree line. Everything is still damp. The soil holds onto the night's cold just long enough to make you feel like you caught something private, something the rest of the day doesn't get to see. I was out there last spring, walking the rows around 6 in the morning, coffee going cold in my hand, and I was doing what I always do when I spend too long looking at my own plants. I was rationalizing, telling myself the color was fine, telling myself the growth rate was normal for this time of year, telling myself that the slight softness in the lower leaves didn't mean anything. I've been gardening for going on 30 years, and for most of those years I had a very sophisticated relationship with mediocrity. I'd gotten good at explaining it away. The soil was the wrong pH, the season started late. We had that weird cold snap in May. There was always a reason that had nothing to do with me or the choices I was making. The plants looked fine, and fine, I told myself, was good enough. I was wrong about that for a very long time. What finally broke through wasn't a conversation with an agronomist. It wasn't a soil test result or a book I read over winter. It was a drive I took about 4 years ago through Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in the middle of July. I wasn't going there for the farming. I was cutting through on my way somewhere else, the kind of drive where you've got the windows down and you're not really paying attention to much. And then the fields came into view, and I found myself slowing down without deciding to. Rows of corn that looked like they'd been placed there by someone who understood geometry at a molecular level. Kitchen gardens visible from the road with a density of growth that almost looked aggressive, plants pressing against each other, deep-colored, upright, not a yellowed leaf in sight from where I was sitting. I pulled over. I don't know exactly why. It was one of those instinctive things, the kind your body does before your brain has caught up. And I just sat there with the engine off, looking at those gardens across the fence line, and I felt something I wasn't expecting to feel. I felt embarrassed. Because whatever was happening on that side of the fence, it wasn't complicated. There were no drip lines snaking through the beds, no bags of product stacked near the barn, no color-coded feeding schedule tacked to a post, just soil, plants, and a relationship between the two that looked like it had been going on long enough that neither party needed to try very hard anymore. I drove home and went back to my fine garden, and I didn't do anything differently for a few months. But I kept thinking about it. I started reading, started asking around, started trying to understand what practices had actually sustained those farms across nearly 200 years without a single trip to the garden center. And when I got to the part about liquid amendments, about the specific liquid fertility method Amish farming communities had been using consistently since at least the early 1820s, I had one of those moments of recognition that feels less like learning something new and more like being reminded of something you should have known all along, because the answer was not sophisticated. It was not the product of modern biochemistry or university extension research. It predated all of that by a century, and I want to be straight with you before we go any further. What I'm going to describe is going to sound too simple. You're going to hear it and think there must be something more to it, some additional step or product that completes the picture. There isn't. This is the picture. And if you stick around to the end, I'll share the one specific technique that I've almost never seen written down anywhere. The thing they applied to seedlings specifically that I only found out about after 2 summers of showing up at farm stands and asking questions nobody expected me to ask. Before we get into the method, I want to make sure you understand what's actually happening in your soil. Because if you don't have this foundation, the method is just a recipe you follow without knowing why. And recipes without understanding break down the moment something unexpected happens. So here's the honest version of what soil is and what it needs. Soil is not a growing medium. I know that sounds obvious, but the entire synthetic fertilizer industry was built on treating it like an inert matrix that holds plants in place while you deliver nutrients directly to the roots in soluble form. That model is not wrong exactly. It works. You can grow plants that way. But it's the agricultural equivalent of feeding someone through an IV for their whole life. The plant survives. It might even produce a reasonable yield. But something fundamental has been bypassed, and over time, the system that was supposed to be self-sustaining loses its capacity to sustain anything. A single tablespoon of genuinely healthy, biologically active soil contains more individual living organisms than there are human beings on this planet. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, all of them operating in relationships with each other and with plant root systems that took thousands of years to develop and that we are only beginning to map with modern science. What all of those organisms need, the fuel that runs the entire system, is nitrogen. Not nitrogen from a bag, not nitrogen from a synthetic chelate. Nitrogen in organic form. Nitrogen attached to compounds that were recently part of something living. When that kind of nitrogen arrives in a biologically active soil, the response is not gradual. Microbial populations spike within hours. Enzymatic activity increases. The root zone becomes more porous as fungal threads extend. Nutrient cycling, the process by which locked-up minerals become available to plants, accelerates across the whole profile. And plants sitting above all of that activity respond at the leaf level within days. Not weeks, days. That's the mechanism. The method we're talking about today is just the most efficient, most time-tested delivery system for getting that nitrogen where it needs to go. The liquid the Amish have been using since the 1820s is fermented animal urine combined with diluted liquid manure. I'll pause here because I know what some of you are thinking, and I thought the same thing the first time I heard it. I want you to hold that reaction for just a moment and follow the science with me, because what modern research has confirmed about this input is genuinely remarkable, not because it's surprising, but because it validates with precise biochemical language exactly what those farming communities understood through 2 centuries of careful observation. Aged animal urine is exceptionally high in urea. Urea, once it enters the soil, is converted by naturally occurring urease enzymes into ammonium, one of the 2 nitrogen forms that both soil microbes and plant roots use most directly and most efficiently. But that's not all that's in aged urine. There are trace minerals, there's potassium, and there are naturally occurring compounds called cytokinins, plant hormones that directly stimulate cell division and root development in actively growing tissue. Liquid manure, when it's been properly diluted and given time to partially ferment, contributes phosphorus, secondary trace elements, and living microbial populations from the digestive systems of the animals. You are not just delivering nutrients when you apply this. You are delivering biology. You are inoculating your soil with the organisms that process and transfer nutrients in forms the plant can actually use. The combination is not accidental. It was not designed. It was discovered, refined, and passed down because it worked every single season across every type of weather those communities faced. That's not luck. That's a proven system. Now let me walk you through how to do this correctly, because the details matter here, and I'd rather you start with honest expectations than enthusiasm that fades when you skip a step and get inconsistent results. If you have access to livestock urine from chickens, rabbits, goats, cattle, horses, it doesn't matter much which, you collect it in a covered container. The cover is important. You're not trying to seal it airtight. You're trying to slow the evaporation of ammonia while the material ages. Let it sit for a minimum of 10 to 14 days before you use it. I want to be clear about why this step is non-negotiable. Fresh urine has both a pH and a concentration of ammonia that can cause genuine chemical burn to plant root tissue and can disrupt the microbial balance in your soil rather than supporting it. The aging process allows excess ammonia to off-gas slowly, allows the pH to move toward a more neutral range, and allows the urea to begin its conversion into the ammonium form that your soil biology can immediately use. You cannot rush this. 10 days is the minimum. 14 is better. After that aging period, you dilute. For soil drench application, meaning you're watering it in around the base of your plants, the ratio is 1 part aged urine to 10 parts water. For foliar application, meaning you're putting it through a pump sprayer and applying it directly to the leaf surface, you go to 1 part aged urine to 20 parts water. Foliar feeding through plant stomata is faster than root uptake, which means the concentration needs to be lower to avoid tissue damage. 10 to 1 for the soil, 20 to 1 for the leaves. Those ratios were worked out over generations, and they have been confirmed by controlled horticultural testing. Don't adjust them because you feel like more would be better. More is not better here. Timing your applications correctly is the part of this practice that separates people who get dramatic results from people who get modest ones. Our instinct as gardeners is to respond to problems. We see yellow leaves and we reach for something. We see slow growth and we start adding inputs. That is reactive gardening, and it is one of the core reasons most home gardens are chronically underperforming. The traditional approach, and again, this is backed by everything modern plant physiology has taught us, is to apply ahead of the need. You begin your liquid amendment program before you transplant, working the diluted liquid into the soil a few days before your seedlings go in. Then you establish a cycle. Every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the entire active growing season, you apply again. You are not responding to a crisis. You are maintaining the biological conditions under which crisis cannot develop. This is a fundamentally different mindset, and it takes a season or two to fully trust it because you won't see a dramatic before and after moment. What you'll see instead is an absence of the problems you used to have. No sudden yellowing in midsummer. No growth stall in the heat. No blossom drop that you can't explain. These absences are the results. Learn to read them. Apply in the early morning or late evening, never in full midday sun, because UV exposure degrades some of the biological components and you lose part of what you're delivering. After soil application, water the bed immediately and thoroughly. This drives the nitrogen down through the soil profile toward the root zone. If you let it sit on the surface, a significant portion oxidizes and volatilizes before it can do anything useful. Let me go through the mistakes I see most often, because I made every single one of them before I worked out what was actually happening. The first and most common is skipping or shortening the aging period. People collect the material, they're excited to use it, and they tell themselves a few days is close enough. It isn't. The chemistry is not complete at 5 days or even at 8 days. The ammonia concentration is still high enough to cause real damage. Set a reminder, mark the container with the date, and wait the full 10 to 14 days. There is no shortcut here that doesn't cost you something. The second mistake is underdiluting, or occasionally, and I've seen this more than once, mixing up the ratios and applying at full concentration or close to it. Liquid organic nitrogen at too high a concentration in the root zone creates an osmotic pressure differential that pulls water out of root cells rather than into them. You will see wilting within 24 hours that looks exactly like drought stress, and every instinct you have will tell you to water more, which makes it worse. 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Mark your dilution container, don't guess. The third mistake is applying to dry soil. If your beds are dry, and in summer they often are, by the time you get out to the garden, water them first. Wait at least an hour. Then apply the diluted amendment. Dry soil does not distribute liquid inputs evenly. You end up with concentrated wet pockets in some areas and completely untreated areas in others. The even, broad distribution across the root zone is what produces the consistent results. Pre-watering makes that possible. The fourth mistake is inconsistency. People do 2 or 3 applications, see some improvement, and then let the schedule slip. The biology you are building in your soil is not permanent. It needs regular feeding just like any living system. 2 to 3 weeks between applications is the rhythm. Hold to it. Here is the part I almost never see written down anywhere, and it's the reason I told you to stick around. Over the course of 2 summers of visiting farm stands in communities where this tradition is still practiced, I started having conversations, slow ones. The kind where you have to earn the information by showing genuine curiosity rather than just asking for it, about what specifically they applied to seedlings in the first week after transplant. Because transplant shock is one of the great unavoidable friction points in home gardening. You take a seedling from the controlled environment of a tray, put it in open ground, and ask it to completely rebuild its relationship with a new soil environment while also continuing to grow. The stress of that process is real and measurable. What I found out, and this is not in any gardening book I've read, is that they weren't applying the diluted urine alone to new transplants. They were combining it, half and half, with what I can only describe as compost water. Water that had been sitting with finished, well-aged compost submerged in it for 48 hours, then strained clear, both already at their working dilutions before being combined. What this does biologically is introduce two distinct and complementary pathways at the same time. The urea nitrogen from the aged urine feeds the bacterial community in the immediate root zone, giving the plant access to fast, available nutrition exactly when it needs it most. The compost water introduces a much broader spectrum of microbial diversity, including the fungal species that form mycorrhizal associations with plant roots. Those fungal networks, once established in the first week after transplant, extend the plant's effective root reach dramatically and serve it for the entire rest of its life in that soil. You are giving the seedling a fast hit of nutrition and a permanent biological infrastructure in a single application. I started doing this 3 seasons ago. Transplant shock, which I had accepted as an inevitable cost of moving plants into the ground, became almost undetectable. Growth resumed faster. Establishment time shortened measurably. I'm not going to put an exact number on it because I want you to try it yourself and form your own conclusion. But the difference was not subtle. Here is what I want you to walk away with. The Amish didn't discover something secret. They preserved something that the rest of us were convinced to trade away. The understanding that fertility is a biological phenomenon before it is a chemical one, that soil fed with life produces life, and that the most consistent results over the longest period of time come from the simplest inputs applied with patience and rhythm. Your garden does not need another product. It almost certainly does not need more complexity. What it probably needs is one thing, this thing applied at the right dilution, on the right schedule, starting earlier in the season than feels necessary, to soil that's been prepared to receive it. If you want to try this and you're not sure where to source animal urine in any meaningful quantity, start with rabbits. They are the easiest livestock for a home garden context. They produce consistently, and their urine is among the highest in nitrogen of any common farm animal. Chicken coops are another excellent source. The liquid that accumulates in bedding can be leached with water and treated the same way. Start with one bed. Commit to one full growing season. Hold the dilution ratios. Hold the 2 to 3 week schedule. Pre-water before every application. And let the biology do what it's been doing on those Lancaster County farms for 200 years. I'd rather you go in with honest expectations and be surprised than go in expecting a miracle and miss the real results because they didn't look dramatic enough. Drop your questions in the comments. Tell me what you're growing, what your soil situation is, and what you're working with. I read everything down there, and some of the most useful refinements I've made to my own practice came out of those conversations. Take care of your soil. It will take care of everything else.